Wendy, 35 years old, a data analyst, lives in a modern apartment in the heart of the city, where the lights never dim, but darkness has crept into her 8-year marriage to Steven. He's a charming man with a smile that melts away doubts, always promising a lavish life he's never delivered. Wendy still remembers their anniversary night when Steven gave her a cheap necklace, whispering, "One day, I'll give you the world." She cried, believing it was love. But lately, his unexplained disappearances and murky financial secrets have left her wondering, who is Steven, really? On that stormy night, as she slept soundly, a horrifying truth began to unravel. The city was engulfed in the growl of thunder, as if the sky itself raged on behalf of secrets yet to be unveiled. Wendy slept deeply on the cold double bed, her body exhausted after a long day unraveling complex data in a stifling office. She had no idea that, within her own home, Steven, the husband she once trusted, was creeping down the stairs, his eyes glinting not with love, but with greed. The blue glow from Wendy's laptop screen illuminated his face, highlighting a sinister smirk she'd never seen before. His fingers danced swiftly across the keyboard, slipping into her accounts like an unlocked door, stealing credit card information he thought was the key to the lavish life he'd always dreamed of. In mere minutes, Steven had spent $60,000, first-class tickets to Italy, a dazzling diamond ring, and nights at a 5-star hotel on the Amalfi Coast. He grinned smugly, picturing himself in a new suit, strutting among admiring glances, oblivious to the fact that he'd just stepped into a trap with no escape. The next morning, as faint sunlight filtered through the curtains, Wendy awoke with an inexplicable sense of unease. She reached for her phone, intending to brew a coffee to shake off her fatigue, but a flood of transaction alerts halted her in her tracks. Her eyes widened, her breath catching as she read each line: $12,000 for plane tickets, $8,000 for a ring, $5,000 for a lavish dinner at an Italian restaurant. A total of $60,000, a sum she'd never dreamed of in her years of grinding to keep their family afloat. Her hands trembled, but her mind sharpened with uncanny clarity. As a data analyst, Wendy knew this wasn't a system glitch or a random hack. She checked the login history on her laptop. Steven's digital fingerprint stood out like a silent confession. But what stopped her heart wasn't the money, it was what awaited in her inbox. A message from an unknown number flashed on the screen, short but sharp as a blade. "Thanks for the trip, I love you, L." Wendy read it over and over, feeling the floor beneath her crumble. Who was L? What trip? In her mind, scattered pieces began to click together: Steven's late nights with the scent of unfamiliar perfume, the messages he'd hurriedly dismiss when she entered the room, the evasive looks whenever she asked about money. Laura. The name struck her like lightning, a woman Steven had once mentioned in passing as just an old coworker, now the accomplice in his game of betrayal. Wendy sank into a chair, clutching her chest as pain spread like a smoldering fire. It wasn't just her money, it was the years of trust, sacrifice, and tears of joy shed over his empty promises, all reduced to a cruel joke shared between him and his secret lover. She broke down, but it wasn't the weak sobs of a betrayed wife. It was the cry of fury, of a shattered heart refusing to surrender. Tears streamed down her cheeks, hot and mingled with the rain still falling outside. Wendy recalled their anniversary night, when Steven placed that cheap necklace in her hand, his eyes sparkling with promises: "One day, I'll give you the world." She'd believed him, cried with emotion, convinced herself that love didn't need material things, just his presence. But now she saw that the world he'd promised wasn't for her, it was for Laura, for extravagant trips, for sweet whispers she'd never hear again. She clenched her fists, nails digging into her flesh, the physical pain anchoring her from the emotional abyss. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling but resolute, "you won't take everything from me." Then she smiled, a cold, cutting smile, unlike the gentle woman who'd forgiven Steven time and again. She opened her laptop, re-examined the breached account, and spotted a detail he'd overlooked in his triumphant haze. The credit card he'd used wasn't her personal one, it was a dummy account, a tool from a security testing project she'd designed for her company. Every transaction on it automatically triggered alerts to the financial oversight system, and from there, to the authorities. Steven hadn't just stolen money, he'd turned himself into the guinea pig in a trap she'd unwittingly set. Wendy leaned back in her chair, the rain outside now sounding like a victory anthem. She pictured Stephen laughing with Laura under the Italian sun, clinking expensive wine glasses, unaware that each swipe of the card was a self-inflicted wound. She picked up her phone, her fingers sliding across the screen with eerie calm. She called Rachel, her lawyer and best friend, her voice choked but steady. "Stephen took $60,000 from me, and he's in Italy with a woman named Laura." There was a beat of silence on the other end before Rachel replied, her tone tinged with shock. "You sure?" "If that's true, he's done for." Wendy nodded, though Rachel couldn't see, and said, "Positive." "But Rachel, I want him to pay triple what he took from me." Rachel let out a soft, promising laugh. "All right. Send me everything you've got, and I'll call Carter, the financial crimes agent. He won't know what hit him." She imagined Stephen in his pricey suit, flaunting the diamond ring he'd bought with her money, bragging to Laura about his perfect plan. But she knew that plan wasn't perfect, it was a disaster, and she'd be the one to pen its ending. The pain in her chest lingered, but it was no longer a burden. It was fuel, a driving force, a reminder that she wasn't just a victim, she was a survivor, and more than that, the one who'd bring Stephen to his knees begging for mercy. After the call with Rachel, Wendy set her phone down on the table, the sound of the rain outside the window fading into a heavy silence that filled the apartment. She stood up and walked to the mirror in the living room, staring at herself, red-rimmed eyes, disheveled hair, but a face no longer belonging to a weak woman. She saw a new light in her gaze, not the naive hope she once held for Stephen, but the fire of resolve, a promise to herself that she wouldn't let him win. That night, as the city slipped into sleep, Wendy sat at her desk, the laptop screen glowing like a beacon guiding her path. She was no longer the wife waiting for Stephen's explanations, she was the hunter, and he was the prey, unaware he'd been targeted. Wendy opened the financial monitoring system she'd designed, her fingers gliding over the keyboard with the precision of an artist painting a masterpiece of revenge. She didn't rush. Each click was a beat of the control she was wresting back from Stephen's hands. The system revealed his transactions were still rolling in, a $3,000 bill at a jewelry store in Naples, $7,000 for a short yacht trip, and a string of smaller charges for expensive wine and lavish meals. She pictured him standing on the deck, sea breeze tousling his hair, arm around Laura, laughing as if the world belonged to him. But she knew what he didn't, every swipe of the card was a brick in the invisible prison that would soon confine him. Wendy didn't just want him caught, she wanted him to feel the fall from the peak of his delusions to the depths of reality. She picked up her phone, her fingers hesitating over the screen before typing a message to Stephen. "Have fun on your business trip," she wrote, her tone so falsely sweet it made her own skin crawl. "I trust you'll handle everything as well as always." She hit send, her lips curling into a wicked smile. It wasn't encouragement, it was a dagger wrapped in silk, a way to keep him steeped in blind confidence. She knew Stephen would read it with his usual arrogant shrug, maybe even brag to Laura that Wendy doesn't suspect a thing. The innocence he thought she still possessed was her strongest weapon now. Wendy set the phone down, feeling like she'd just released a small fish to bait a shark, and she was ready to reel it in. By early afternoon, Rachel called back, her voice ringing through the speaker like a triumphant melody. "Carter's on it," she announced, barely containing her excitement. "They're tracking Stephen's every transaction through your system. Are you sure you want to let him roam free for a few more days? I could have them arrest him now." Wendy tilted her head, gazing out the window where the sky was turning a brilliant orange at sunset. "No," she replied, her voice low but firm. "I want him to think he's won. I want him to savor every second, so when it all comes crashing down, he'll never forget the feeling." Rachel laughed, a sharp sound like breaking glass. "You're terrifying, Wendy. But I love it. I'll tell Carter to wait, let him dig his own grave deeper." Wendy hung up and stood to brew a cup of tea, the minty aroma wafting through the air like a reminder that she could still find peace amid this storm. She cradled the hot mug and stepped onto the balcony, letting the cool afternoon breeze tousle her hair. Inside her, a wave of emotion surged, not the pain of yesterday, but the thrill of a plan taking shape. She imagined Stephen in a white suit, glass of wine in hand, regaling Laura with grand dreams he'd never truly chased. She wondered if Laura knew the man beside her wasn't the genius he claimed to be, but a fool dancing on the edge of an abyss. Wendy sipped her tea, the warmth sliding down her throat, and whispered to herself, "Keep dreaming, Stephen. The sweeter the dream, the harder the fall." The next day, a new alert popped up. Stephen had just spent $10,000 to rent a hilltop villa with a sea view. Wendy smirked, jotting the detail into the evidence file she was preparing for Carter. She didn't just send transaction data, she analyzed each expense, tying them to real-time locations and timestamps, crafting an airtight narrative. This wasn't just her expertise, it was her joy, her way of reclaiming power from the man who'd tried to take everything. She pictured Stephen standing in court, his face pale as he realized there was no escaping his lies. But then a thought made her pause. Was he worth all this energy? She shook her head, telling herself this wasn't for Stephen, it was for her, for the years she'd let him manipulate her. That night, Wendy lay on the sofa, the dim glow of streetlights filtering through the glass. She didn't turn on the lights, darkness felt like the perfect companion for her mood. Her phone buzzed with a message from Stephen. "Thanks, babe, this trip's better than I imagined. I'll be home soon." She read it and laughed aloud, the sound echoing in the empty room. "Home to me?" she muttered, her voice tinged with bitterness. "You'll come back, but not the way you think." She didn't reply, instead opening her laptop to send the final evidence file to Rachel. "Done," she wrote in the email. "Let Carter move when the time's right." As she closed the laptop, a strange feeling washed over her, not mere satisfaction, but a profound relief. She stood and walked to the window, gazing down at the cars silently streaming through the streets below. Somewhere out there, Stephen was living in his illusion of victory, but she knew the truth. He wasn't the predator in this game, he was the prey, and she held the rope. Wendy closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, feeling her heartbeat stronger than ever. She wasn't just plotting revenge, she was rebuilding herself, step by step, from the ashes of a marriage she'd once thought would last forever. 3 days after Stephen's last message, the city sky turned a pale gray, as if it, too, were holding its breath for the inevitable. Wendy stood in the kitchen, a small knife in hand, slicing apples slowly, the steady sound of the blade hitting the cutting board echoing like the ticking of a countdown clock. She no longer checked the monitoring system, she'd handed everything to Rachel and Carter, trusting that the wheels of justice were rolling as they should. But when the sound of the door lock clicked, she froze, the knife slipping from her hand and clattering to the floor with a sharp, chilling ring. Stephen stepped inside, his white suit gleaming under the lights, the diamond ring on his right hand flashing like a taunt. He tossed his suitcase to the floor, a smug grin stretching across his tanned face. "Wendy, you should have seen me in Italy," he said, his voice dripping with pride. "I've upgraded our lives. You'll be proud of me." Wendy picked up the knife, placing it gently on the counter, her hands no longer trembling as they had in the early days of uncovering the truth. She stepped out of the kitchen, her eyes locking onto Stephen's, not with explosive anger, but with the terrifying calm of a storm brewing before it strikes. "Proud?" she repeated, her voice soft but cutting like the blade she'd just held. "Of what, Stephen? Of how you vanished with another woman, or how you thought I was too stupid to notice?" Stephen frowned, his smile faltering, but he quickly regained his swagger. "What are you talking about?" he scoffed, stepping closer, waving a hand as if performing a play. "Don't make up stories. I did it all for us." Wendy laughed, a dry, hollow sound that reverberated through the room, making Stephen flinch. "For us?" she asked, tilting her head. "Or for Laura?" Laura's name shot from her mouth like a bullet, and this time, Stephen couldn't hide the flicker of panic in his eyes. He opened his mouth to argue, but before his next lie could spill out, the doorbell rang, a short, decisive chime, like the hammer of fate. Wendy smiled, a smile devoid of warmth, and walked to the door. Special Agent Carter stood there, tall in a black suit, his steely eyes scanning the room. But what froze Stephen wasn't Carter, it was the woman behind him, her blonde hair disheveled, her panicked eyes locked on him. "Laura." She stumbled in, her high heels unsteady on the wooden floor, her trembling voice rising in a shout. "I didn't know anything, Stephen. You said the money was yours, you said we'd start over." Wendy turned back to Stephen, and for the first time in years, she saw him, truly saw him, not the charming husband she'd once loved, but a coward shrinking before the truth. Carter stepped forward, his deep, cold voice slicing through the stifling air. "Stephen Miller, you're under arrest for financial fraud, falsification, and unauthorized use of accounts. We have evidence from the monitoring system, and Laura here has agreed to testify to lessen her own liability." Stephen stumbled back, his back hitting the wall, his face as pale as paper. No, this is a mistake," he stammered, turning to Wendy with pleading eyes. "Wendy, tell them. You know I wouldn't do this, you're my wife." But Wendy just stood there, arms crossed, her gaze icy. "Your wife?" she echoed, her voice quivering not with pain, but with the fury that had simmered too long. "You chose her over me, Stephen. You chose trips, luxuries, and lies over me. Don't call me your wife anymore, I'm not someone you can use." Laura, tears now streaming down her face, pointed at Stephen, her voice breaking. "You said she didn't matter. You said she'd never find out. I trusted you, and now I'm dragged into this." Wendy turned to Laura, meeting the eyes of the woman who'd unwittingly become part of her nightmare. She felt no jealousy, only contempt, not for Laura, but for Stephen, who'd turned both women into pawns in his selfish game. "You don't need to explain," Wendy said to Laura, her tone eerily calm. "I don't blame you. I just pity that we both once believed in a man like him." Carter signaled the two officers waiting outside to step in, the clink of handcuffs ringing like a final note. Stephen thrashed, shouting, "Wendy, please. I didn't mean for this, I just wanted us to have a better life." But Wendy turned away, walking to the window, gazing out at the gray sky beginning to clear. "A better life?" she murmured, loud enough for him to hear. "You had that chance for 8 years, Stephen. You had me, but you chose to destroy it." The handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists, and Stephen's yells faded as the officers dragged him out. Laura followed Carter quietly, head bowed, leaving Wendy alone in a room now silent to the point of suffocation. She stood there, her hand resting on the cold window frame, her breathing slow as it synced with the world outside. She didn't cry, there were no tears left for Stephen. But inside, a wave of emotion swelled, relief mixed with a fleeting pang for the years lost. She glanced back at the empty room, where Stephen's suitcase lay abandoned, a reminder of the chaos he'd left behind. She walked over and kicked it aside, the thud sounding like a declaration that she was done with him, completely and forever. Outside, a faint ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a glow on Wendy's face through the glass. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, feeling her heartbeat strong, no longer bound by empty promises. Stephen had thought he was the victor, but now he was the loser, not just to the law, but to the woman he'd once underestimated. Wendy opened her eyes, her gaze steady and forward. She knew this wasn't the end, it was a beginning, and this time, she'd write her own story. The next day, Rachel called, her voice crackling through the speaker with a mix of professionalism and excitement. "Stephen took the deal," she announced. "He's paying back the full $60,000, 3 years of community service, and probation. Carter says it's the best he could have hoped for, no jail time, but nothing left to brag about either." Wendy sank onto the sofa, cradling a steaming mug of coffee, the warmth from the white porcelain seeping into her palms. "Paying back?" she asked, her tone light but laced with irony. "Where's he getting the money when everything he had came from me?" Rachel laughed, a clear, bell-like sound. "That's his problem, not yours. Accounts frozen, luxuries seized, he's begging Laura for help, but she's vanished as fast as she appeared." Wendy's lips twitched, picturing Stephen in wrinkled clothes, standing in an empty apartment, calling out to a woman who no longer cared. Justice, she thought, sometimes didn't need shackles, it just needed solitude. She stood and walked to her desk, opening the drawer where she'd once kept mementos of their marriage, photos, letters, and the cheap necklace Stephen had given her in a fleeting, false moment of love. She picked it up, the thin chain dangling between her fingers, its dull metal reflecting her eyes, now free of tears. She remembered the night he'd placed it in her hand, his eyes sparkling like stars, and she'd believed it was all she needed. But now, it was just a meaningless trinket, a reminder of the innocence she'd once had, and lost. Wendy stepped onto the balcony, the cold morning breeze tugging at her hair, and with a decisive flick, she tossed the necklace into the street below. It fell, glinting one last time before disappearing among the traffic, a final goodbye to the past. Her phone buzzed again, this time from an unknown number. Wendy frowned, hesitating, but answered. Stephen's voice came through, weak and raspy, a far cry from the confidence she'd once known. "Wendy, I'm sorry," he said, each word dragged from a deep well of desperation. "I didn't want to lose you. I just wanted us to have a better life, I swear." She stayed silent, letting him continue, hearing his ragged breaths over the line. "Laura's nothing, she left me. You're all I have. Please, give me a chance." Wendy laughed, not the bitter laugh of yesterday, but a soft, almost pitying sound. "A chance?" she replied, her voice even. "You had 8 years of chances, Stephen. You threw them away for a woman who didn't stay, for things you never really owned. I'm not something you can crawl back to when it all falls apart." She hung up before he could say more, feeling as if she'd just shed a tattered old coat. That afternoon, Wendy went to the lawyer's office to sign the divorce papers. Rachel placed the document in front of her, eyes gleaming with pride. "You did it," she said, handing Wendy a pen. "He's got no claim on you anymore." Wendy took the pen, her fingers tracing the words "divorce granted," and signed her name with a bold, unwavering stroke. As she set the pen down, a strange sensation flooded her, not sadness, but relief, as if she'd just unfastened an invisible chain that had bound her neck for years. She looked at Rachel and smiled. "I didn't just escape him," she said, her voice steady. "I escaped myself, the old version of me who thought he was everything." In the days that followed, word of Stephen spread like wildfire among mutual acquaintances. He'd moved back in with his mother, working part-time at a grocery store to pay off his debts, the white suit now just a distant memory of luxury. Laura, as Rachel had predicted, was out of touch, leaving Stephen alone to face the wreckage he'd built. Wendy caught snippets of these stories in passing conversations, but she didn't linger on them. She didn't need to witness his downfall to feel victorious. Her triumph lay in the freedom she'd reclaimed, not in his collapse. One evening, Wendy stood in the kitchen, holding a different knife, not to slice apples, but to open a can of vibrant red paint she'd just bought. She painted the living room wall, each brushstroke a declaration of rebirth. Red, a color Stephen had hated, calling it too loud, was now hers, a symbol of the vibrancy she'd suppressed to please him. When she finished, she stepped back, admiring the wall glowing under the lights, and felt her heart beat strong, unbound by old memories. She shouted, not in pain, but in pure joy, the sound echoing through the apartment like a song of triumph. "I did it," she whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks, but this time, they were tears of liberation. Outside, the city buzzed with lights and noise, but in Wendy's apartment, a new peace had taken root. She was no longer the waiting wife, no longer the woman who sacrificed for someone unworthy. She was Wendy, strong, free, and ready for a life she'd paint herself. Stephen could keep struggling in his ruins, but she didn't care anymore. He was no longer her problem, and maybe he never truly had been. Once the vibrant red wall dried, Wendy stood in the middle of her apartment, breathing in the fresh paint mingled with the crisp air from the wide-open window. The morning light streamed in, illuminating the items she'd chosen herself, a jade-green armchair, a small potted plant on the sill, and a hand-woven rug with intricate patterns mirroring the chaos her life had once been. The room bore no trace of Stephen, no more empty promises, no more shadows of doubt he'd planted in her heart. She walked to the mirror, gazing at herself, and for the first time in years, she saw a woman who didn't need anyone to define her, just Wendy, whole and free. She smiled, not to please anyone else, but because she'd found light in days she'd once thought held only darkness. One afternoon, Wendy decided to leave the city. She packed a few clothes, a favorite book, and drove to the coast, a place she'd dreamed of but never dared visit, because Stephen always said, "We'll go together." The salty sea breeze whipped through her hair as she stood on the sand, barefoot, the cold waves lapping at her toes. She shouted into the ocean, her voice blending with the crashing waves, not to call anyone, but to affirm she was still alive, still strong after everything. "I'm free," she yelled, and this time, no one could steal that sound. She lay back on the sand, staring at the endless blue sky, feeling her heart open to possibilities she'd once thought unreachable. The sea whispered to her, not words of comfort, but of celebration. She'd overcome not just Steven, but the limits she'd once set for herself. Back home after the trip, Wendy found a plain envelope slipped under her door, no stamp, no return address. She frowned, opened it, and slanted handwriting emerged like a sudden cut from the past. "Dear Wendy," it began, "I'm Steven's mother. I'm not writing to beg forgiveness for him, but to say you deserve more than what he did. Before he met you, he deceived our family, my husband's savings, my trust, and I'd hoped you'd change him. I was wrong. You're stronger than I ever imagined, and I'm sorry for the pain he caused." Wendy sank into a chair, her trembling hands clutching the letter, tears spilling not for Steven, but for this unexpected truth. She'd never met his mother, never known he'd betrayed not just her, but those who'd raised him. The letter was a mirror, reflecting a strength she hadn't realized she possessed, and for the first time, she cried not from loss, but from pride. She stood, stepping onto the balcony, the letter still in hand. The wind blew, carrying the scent of a new day, and she let it go, watching it flutter in the air before disappearing among the rooftops. She didn't need to keep it, the truth it held was already etched into her soul, a confirmation that she wasn't just a survivor, but a victor. She turned back inside, opened a bottle of wine, poured a full glass, and raised it toward the twinkling city lights beyond. "Thank you, Steven," she whispered, her voice tinged with irony but genuine, "for teaching me how to love myself." She took a sip, the bittersweet taste sliding down her throat, and felt her heart lighten like never before. In the weeks that followed, Wendy lived as if reborn. She joined a painting class, letting her brushstrokes tell her story on canvas, the curves of ocean waves, bold red swatches of rebirth. She met friends, laughed louder, and no longer dodged questions about Steven. He was now a distant blur, a man struggling somewhere in the city, but no longer tied to her. She heard he was doing odd jobs, living off his mother, but she didn't pause to dwell on it. He wasn't her story anymore. One evening, Wendy sat on the balcony, wine glass in hand, gazing at the bustling crowds below. The city still thrummed with life, but this time, she didn't feel swept up in it. She was part of it, but on her own terms, free, strong, and whole. She thought of the letter, the years with Steven, and realized everything, the pain, the betrayal, the fight, had led her to this moment. She raised her glass again, whispering to herself, "To a new beginning, where I'm all I need." The night breeze swept through, carrying the promise of days ahead, and Wendy knew she was ready. Wendy's story conveys profound messages: the power of self-awareness, the value of resilience, and the importance of letting go of toxic elements to reclaim oneself. A standout lesson is that no one is too old to start over. Whether at 35 or 70, you can rise from pain and redefine your life on your own terms. For an older audience, this serves as a reminder that time isn't a limitation, but an opportunity to value yourself more deeply. Trust your instincts, face the truth with courage, and don't let the past imprison you. Like Wendy, you can transform pain into motivation, repainting the walls of your life with vibrant colors, no matter your age. Life isn't about what others owe you, but what you dare to seize for yourself, a powerful message to live fully at any stage.